Hey guys, Darius Wajda, aka KomodoDragonJesus here, making a short video about the heads-up display I use when I play and when I stream. The heads-up display I use is the 6-max Cash Game HUD made by ProPokerHUDs.com. And just to give you a little bit of a background on myself and my heads-up displays, I've been grinding cash for a few years now successfully. Most of my play has been at 100 and 200 no limit. I've been using this heads-up display for, I think it's been about 3 months now. I got it when it was in its beta phase, and now I'm using the final version. And I basically got it, and I loved it. So, before I get started, I just wanted to kind of emphasize two things I thought they did really well about it. And you know, I can concentrate on as I go through it. One, it's really well organized. Basically, everything is quite easy to find and exactly where you'd expect it to be. And two, they have very, very specific stats that I really like. And I'll get to that in just a second. To start off going through it, basically, you know, what you get with this HUD is you get 3 panels for each player. You get a basic general pre-flop one. You get a more specific pre-flop one, and then this big one on the end is post-flop stats. If you're like me and you were transitioning from a very, very simple heads-up display, I was never one of those guys who had, like 200 numbers on my screen that only I could decipher because I'm the one that made it. No, I was never like that. I basically had one panel with mostly the basic pop-ups. So I thought, 3 panels was gonna be a bit of a jump. But just the way it was organized, it was actually a pretty easy transition. So to start off here, you got the general pre-flop panel. It basically has all the pre-flop stats you would use basically ever. It's got VPIP, it's got the 3-bet stat, it's got the squeeze stat, the 4-bet stat, the fold to 3-bet, the fold to 4-bet, and of course the limp. If you were paying attention, you might have noticed there was one stat I missed there. I did not say PFR, the pre-flop raise stat, and this actually doesn't have it. What it has instead is something called raise first in, and that kind of threw me off when I got this heads-up display. But then I kind of figured out why they did it, and it's actually pretty smart. Basically, pre-flop raise is a bit of a jumble of stats. It takes into account any time you put in aggression pre-flop. So anytime you're throwing in the first raise, anytime you're throwing in a re-raise, anytime you're isolating a limper, anytime you're throwing in a cold 4-bet. And that's basically all just kind of jumbled into one general statistic. So what they've actually done here is they've taken all those things, they're all here, they've just kind of separated it. So I'll throw off the raise first in pop-up, and it basically gives you opening ranges whenever this guy is, throwing in the first raise from each position. And then, okay, so what if he's isolating a limper? Well, bam, you got that in red right here. And this is what I was talking about like organization. This is like really, really nicely visually organized. You immediately know what you're looking at, and you can find what you need quickly, because the quicker you can find something on the heads-up display, the more time you actually have to think and make your decision. So you have your raise first in, you have your isolation, then of course you have your 3-bet stats, your 4-bet stats, and they all have a similar display like this. If you've ever seen me on stream, I've said many times this is actually my favorite part of the heads-up display. How detailed it is. So I'm going to throw up the 3-bet pop-up here as an example. It's great to know that the general 3-bet stat is 6% up here. Great. But they kind of went one step further. They went with really specific statistics. How often is this player 3-betting from each position against each position? So you want to get really specific, he's in the cutoff, raising against middle position, well, that's 3.1%. He's in the small blind, he's against the button, well, that's 16%. And it also has it basically color-coded with the blue for the big blind here, whether they're in position or out of position, how do their 3-bet ranges actually differ. And of course, it has the same thing for every single one of these stats. I don't want to go through all of them because I think you guys get the point. I'm going to move on to the next stat. This is a little bit more specific pre-flop. This is basically how do they steal and react to steals. So left side in the blue and the green, you very simply have from each position, how often are they throwing in the steal, and how often are they folding to a 3-bet after they steal. And the numbers are right beside each other. You glance, it takes you a third of a second, and you have all the information you need. Similarly, on the right-hand side here is how often are they actually folding their blinds. How often are they folding their small blind, big blind to the button raise, and how often are they folding blind versus blind. And then right under there in the red, you have instead of how often are they folding, how often are they throwing in re-raises. So basically, the main thing I like about this is that it's really nicely organized. And also, just like with the last panel, this has some pretty cool pop-ups too. One of them that I like here is their opening sizes from each position. Early position, middle position, cutoff button, and small blind. How large are they raising? You'll see this player in particular using 3x everywhere except for the cutoff where they use 2.5x, and on the button they throw in the min raise. It's a fairly typical way to size your bets. But if you see players, drastically changing, maybe, from early position they have like 50% 3x, 50% min raise, then I think there's a pretty good chance they actually have a bet sizing tell. So that's really good to know, and this pop-up kind of helps you pick up on that. Another cool thing they have here is when they're defending their blind, how are they defending it based on the raise size coming at them? So if it's a min raise, you'll see this guy is just going to be calling most of the time, 61%. But when the 3x raise comes in or higher, they're going to reduce that, and they're just going to be folding a lot more often, which does make sense. The bigger the bet, the less you actually have to defend against it. So yeah, that basically sums up everything you'd need to know about somebody stealing or getting it stolen from. And if you need like a certain detail, then of course you can hop back into this first one and see exactly like position versus position, how often are they folding to 3-bets or whatever you may need. And then that leads us to the final box here. This is the post-flop stats. It's of course bigger than the rest. It has a hell of a lot of information in here. I'll start by saying, like, once again, just they went really specific with the stats. I love it. So it's great to know that a player continuation bets 50% of the time, let's say. But what they've done here is they've actually filtered it between in position, out of position, heads up, and multi-way. So it's great to know that somebody in general is throwing in a c-bet 50% of the time. It's even better to know exactly how often they're doing it into a multi-way pot when they're out of position. So there you have in position and out of position. Basically red is, how are they being aggressive, their flop and turn continuation bets. And in green here is how are they defending, how often are they folding to flop and turn continuation bets in each scenario. It's also filtered by 3-bets as well. So then you throw this pop-up open, and here you see it separates into heads up and multi-way. And it basically has whatever you could need to know post-flop. How often do they fold, raise, check raise, call, stuff like that. And one really cool thing that they've done is they've actually incorporated quite a few flowcharts into this heads-up display. And you can see one of them down here. This is the call, flop, check raise flowchart. And you might be thinking, like, what the heck is that? Well, it's basically just a really cool way of showing you how this player reacts after calling a check raise. So you want to plan your hand ahead. You don't just want to say, okay, I'll call flop and reevaluate the turn. Like that could be an okay strategy, but an even better strategy is, I'll call flop and I'll do this on the turn, already knowing going in, evaluating the different turns that you can have. And so this tells you, how the person's going to be reacting to the flop check raise. They're going to be calling. And then after that, what are they doing? This player in particular is actually going to keep calling turn 67% of the time and call river 100% of the time. So either they're calling the check raise really tight and, just continuing as monsters and getting to the river every time, or they just don't quite believe you when you throw in that check raise and they're going to call you down pretty light. And you just basically know that they're not really going to be folding. They have a similar thing for calling turn check raises, and then I'm not going to go through all the pop-ups because this video would last about an hour if I did, but they have similar ones. Like here we got, when people are floating flops, versus people that are floating flops, when people are throwing in probe bets on the turn, etc. And it's a really nice way of showing you exactly what people are going to do, in addition to just showing you the basic percentage. So one of the troubles with, this being so specific and filtered between like positions and, heads up or multi-way pots is, say you don't have a large sample size on somebody. Say you have 200 hands on a new guy at the table, and you might not have very many stats on exactly when he's out of position in a three-way pot versus a check raise. Like that's a really specific scenario. So you might end up clicking one of these pop-ups and see that it's kind of lacking in stats because you just haven't seen that scenario enough. Well, that could end up being a problem. But these guys have actually thought of that. In addition to all these really specific stats, they've kind of made a general post-flop action frequencies. Apparently that's what it's called, a pop-up here. And this just tells you in general how often are they folding, calling, or being aggressive on each of the streets. And of course, being aggressive means throwing in bets or raises. So you'll see in this example, on the flop, this guy is quite a bit more aggressive than he is cally or foldy. But as you get to the turn and the river, the fold percentage increases a bit and it's a little more balanced between the two. And call percentage, is still pretty small. So you can see if you don't have that exact stat, you can at least get a general idea and basically use it to play to the best of your ability. So I thought that was really cool. And just the same as, the graphical pre-flop stuff, I think they've presented this really well. Same goes with the flowcharts there. And now I'm going to get to another pop-up. This is actually my second favorite pop-up of the heads-up display. The first one, of course, is the pre-flop stuff. And it's this river decision box right down here. Whoops, sorry guys, let me bring that back up. River decision box, here we go. Basically what this gives you is you're up against a player. They fired pre-flop, they fired the flop, they fired the turn, they're firing the river. What the heck do you do? Once again, just has a couple pieces of information right beside each other. You can take a quick glance. Well, hey, how often is this guy betting the river? Bam, there it is, 29%. And more importantly, how often are they winning money when they bet the river? So how often is it a value bet? How often is it a bluff? This is a very telling statistic here. Look at this, 81% win money at showdown after betting the river. Like that is an extremely high number. So you can just tell that this player is going to be extremely value bet heavy. And they're not actually going to be bluffing much. So when they throw in those barrels into you, you can actually adjust accordingly. And it has basically the same thing here. The other way around, now they're calling, you're throwing in the bets, you're deciding do you throw in the river bet? And so this shows you how often they call and how often they're actually going to be good when they call. So are they calling really tightly and basically always going to be good? Or are they calling really loose and they're, making like call downs and not really going to win all that often? So that's something I found really helpful. And I didn't, well, I guess I had the stats, but they weren't really well presented in my old heads-up display. So I really liked this after transitioning to this one. And the last thing I want to talk about is basically this hero box right here. So every heads-up display, it either shows you nothing about yourself or it shows you the same thing for yourself as everybody else. Well, I think you need a little more than nothing. I think you want to have a good idea of how you're playing at the table. I also think that having these 3 boxes for yourself would be way, way overkill. Like, there is no way that you need to know that this session over, like 100 hands, whatever you're playing, you don't need to know that you're check raising turns in multi-way pots 31% of the time. That's just, let's face it, you're not going to use that. So what this did is they took the simple statistics. What they have here is your VPIP and your raise first in, and then how often do you steal, how often do you fold to steals, how often do you 3-bet, how often do you fold to 3-bets, how often do you continuation bet, and how often do you fold to continuation bets. So basically, it gives you a general idea of how you're playing, and from there you can make adjustments. You can see, oh well, I'm really tight this session so far, I haven't thrown in a 3-bet, maybe it's time to use that image to my advantage and start being aggressive pre-flop, and that could give you a little bit of an edge on your opponents. So I want to say that basically sums it up, but there's actually quite a bit in this heads-up display that I haven't had a chance to talk about, because if I went through the entire thing, it would go for about an hour. But that's some of the things I find really cool about it, and like I said, I've been using it for a few months now. I really like it. I definitely recommend you guys check it out, and yeah, good luck at the tables. Thanks for watching.